Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Finn, and I have the pleasure of working with Maya Stovall at Ray's Finn Gallery in Detroit. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. We are here for the virtual book launch of Liquor Store Theater, which is a publication that has just come out that Maya has been working on for years at this point with Duke Press. And has an amazing foreword written by Christopher Liu, who is on our panel tonight. So I just wanted to quickly thank all of you viewers for coming, thank all of our panelists, our partners in this talk, NADA and White Columns. Thank you so much. And basically, we are now going to see a very brief 2-minute and 30-second clip of Liquor Store Theater, Volume 6, Number 1. And that's going to give you just a little intro into this project. At the end of the talk, after the panel discussion is over, we're going to see Volume 5, Number 1 in its full form. So that's about 10 minutes and 10 seconds. And I totally encourage everyone to stick around for that. Enjoy your evening, and thank you so much. Turning it over to you guys and the video. So here we
Can you tell me about Detroit?
What would you like to know about Detroit? What period of time are you speaking of? Because I can take you back to Detroit, to the 67 riots if you want to go to Detroit. Well, I was a little kid in Detroit. Actually, I grew up in this neighborhood. And it is a lot of potential here. It's right off the water, downtown right there. They bought all the sports teams back. You go to Eastern Market now, I mean, it's totally different. Gentrification that took place, and we see it every day. Right? I remember in this neighborhood when people were scared to come in the neighborhood, yet now I see them walking the dog. I go to community meetings because they have community meetings, East Side Center. I done been here for many years, back and forth. And downtown, we know it's been drastically changed. When it was primarily black, like 87–90% black, we couldn't get no action down there. Of course, we wouldn't get no action down there. We ain't economically in a position to get action. So they took over and they doing things, and they coming back to, or they are back. The city done changed and they got a stronghold. So keep your taxes paid. If you own some property, keep your property, because it's going probably, prices going up. It's going to build the economy some, but is it going to build the economy for the neighborhood that's been here, for the people who already been here?
Do we have another one coming?
No, we're showing the one clip to start.
Okay, so thank you. My name is Michael Stern Richards from the College of Creative Studies in Detroit, where I met Maya Stovall, and I'd like to welcome everyone tonight. I'd like to start by congratulating Maya Stovall for the emergence of a really, really important practice and a distinctive body of work, which we're going to be discussing tonight. I'd like to congratulate her on the publication of the book. It's an extraordinary achievement. It takes more time to compose a book than to have a child. I think that she would agree with that. But also to congratulate her on her first solo show in New York, at the White Columns Gallery. It's really an astonishing achievement, and so absolutely delighted to be here with friends and colleagues. We have with us tonight Matthew Higgs, who is the Director and Chief Curator, thank you, Matthew, of White Columns, which is where Maya's current exhibition is. Rahima Barber-Williams, who is Chief Curator at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, also in the state of Michigan, like Detroit still is, and Christopher Liu, who is the Nancy and Fred Poses Curator at Whitney. I should also say, my apologies, Chris, that Rahima has acquired work by Maya for the Kalamazoo Institute, and Chris, of course, famously curated Maya's Liquor Store Theater into the Whitney Biennial in 2017. So everyone on this panel has a direct connection and deep investment in the practice and body of work of Maya Stovall. I think before I go to our panelists, I would like to ask Maya if she could just take a few moments to introduce not just specifically Lux, the current exhibition, but if she could introduce the conceptual dimension of her practice, its dance, its installation, a certain type of sculptural practice influenced by Dan Flavin, William Pope, L. There's a lot that's going on. So before I ask the panelists if they could speak about their experience of the work, maybe Maya, you could introduce the audience to what you think is sort of the conceptual heart of your practice.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, MSR, for introducing everyone so graciously. And yeah, so I guess what I'm doing is looking for ways to make space to think, spaces to think, spaces to clarify and to focus the sort of really complicated unreality in which we find ourselves in the day-to-day, in the little details as we put together another day, and then in the sort of macro long-run view as well. So I'm fundamentally across my practices interested in data, in archive,
Yes.
in research, and in these tiny little moments that really make space. What is the purpose of a book or a work of art? To me, it's to make a space to think. And so then, you know, as a conceptual artist with a critical spatial praxis as my fundamental approach, you know, I'm looking for these little spaces in many ways. So spaces in time, spaces in landscape, you know, sort of spaces in ideology, spaces in consumerism or in capitalism that are really sort of consolidating and crystallizing of complexity, where I can document and find some way of, you know, threading people into this world. So I guess it's a sort of an overall.
One of the things I want to do tonight as we get going is try and make the conversation amongst the panelists, not just between the moderator and the individuals. But allow me to pick up on something, Maya, that you said. You're looking for little spaces. Your work, you're a conceptual artist. The work is a spatial praxis. I'm intrigued that you use the old form praxis rather than praxis. But in particular, that you're looking for little spaces. Does that suggest then that your work is actually about liminality?
I think, well, yeah, liminality or sort of this in-betweenness, I think really is fundamental to the experience of living. So yeah, there's definitely something there. And so I'll just read to, in answering your question,
Okay.
I'll read a little clip from the book. So
It is a book launch, so we should hear from it.
yeah, exactly. So let's see. The average liquor store in McDougall-Hunt, according to publicly available business revenue records, earns around $400,000 per year. This in a neighborhood with an estimated $14,000 median annual income. All of the stores in the less than half a square mile neighborhood, McDougall-Hunt, are owned by Arab Americans in a neighborhood upward of 95% African Americans. None of the Arab American store managers lives in the neighborhood. There is no denying that the stores represent hubs of licit and illicit drug use, trade, commercialization, and industry. Recently, an illicit multi-million-dollar drug business was found to be operating at the scene of a similar locale, a check cashing business down the street from the liquor store theater sites, where $17 million of laundered, stashed cash and illicit drugs were located on the scene of the check cashing business during a police raid. Meanwhile, African American Detroiters in McDougall-Hunt are treated with patronizing overtones by Middle Eastern American store owners, charged exorbitant prices, and subjected to poorly appointed, poorly maintained storefronts, public spaces, and interiors associated with the liquor stores, where the liquor store theater project unfolds. In my videos, I render the store's urban ready-mades. I machine a particular aesthetic, turning the decay inside out for a few moments in a video. I touch the edge of the landscape and make it my own, make it the people's, and then the videos end.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to thank you very much, Maya. I'm going to invite our panelists to pick up on what it is that Rahima, you have collected for your institution in Kalamazoo. Matthew and Chris have exhibited what right now is exhibiting. Matthew is exhibiting right now, Chris 3 years ago. So what is it in the practice? I would like each of you, and maybe we can start responding, picking up to one another rather than waiting for me to pose the questions. What is it in this practice, this multidisciplinary practice, that has attracted you to exhibit, to write about, to reflect on? I would love to hear your experience, because you are viewers as well as curators, right? And that's the nature of your investment. That, as it were, there is a powerful attraction that says, I want to make this public. I want to think about this in public. I want to share this. What is it that has attracted you in this developing practice? Matthew, curator and chief curator of the current show at the White Columns, and then let's pick it up.
Sure, thank you. Yep, thanks for inviting me to be involved with tonight's conversation. I first encountered Maya's Lux works, which we're currently showing a series of at White Columns right now, exactly a year ago in Miami. Although that year ago seems like 10 years ago now.
Doesn't it just?
What I encountered, without knowing this body of work by Maya, I'd seen the liquor store theater work at the Winnie by Neil that Christopher co-organized. But what I encountered in Miami was just a series of neon dates on a wall in a fairly dark corridor space. And I didn't know what I was necessarily looking at, but it was very familiar. The language was familiar. It made clear reference to former manifestations of conceptual art. But the work had a kind of sort of, when I spent time with the work and then discovered that each of the dates relates to very specific things that I think Maya has described as critical moments in American history. I think what really intrigued me about the work was its this sort of oscillation, this kind of tension that Maya sets up between the past, i.e. history, and the present tense. And it was this sort of present tenseness of the work that really resonated for me. And I think, the more you spend time with individual works from the series, and you discover more about the motivations for each of the decisions or the choices that Maya's made that's coming out of her research. I found the work in this sort of very poetic way, and a very clear and straightforward way, but not didactic at all. Somehow set up this beautiful relationship between past and present, and allowed me as a visitor with my baggage and my history to stand in front of a specific date and time and develop a kind of quite personal, almost biographical relationship with the time that's being suggested or the era that is being evoked through the work. So what I found very interesting was the richness of what a seemingly simple gesture or straightforward gesture, and then how that gesture could then resonate in all kinds of unimagined, unexpected and unanticipated ways. And, so then we were very excited to be able to show the work in New York, and the exhibition's on until December the 12th, if any of the viewers are in the city. And there's also this beautiful thing, I think, about the work and its use of neon, which I think we invariably associate with nocturnal, the night, and the way that we might see neon used, say, in the liquor store window, advertising Budweiser or something. It's this idea of privileging things. And I like the way that Maya's inverted the kind of commercial use of neon to advertise or to promote something. And instead, she's advertising or promoting very different things. And we can see one of those things now for 1526 on the screen right now. So I just found the work extraordinarily rich. And I think, Maya, maybe I could ask you a question, because in an interview with New York Times this summer in relation to the Lux series, you said this, and I'll quote, you said, "I don't have an interest in emotions or feelings. I like facts." And then elsewhere in the text that we used for the White Columns exhibition, you talk about your process of researching the dates. And I'll quote you again. This is from the press release for the White Columns show. You said, "As I researched the archive and compiled the dates, I'd often cry. The tears are absolutely not tears of sadness or euphoria. They are tears of clarity, tears of legibility, tears of information." And I was very interested and remain very interested in this relationship between this statement about having no interest in emotions or feelings and this preference for facts. Yet at the same time, the work is extraordinarily resonant, I think, emotionally, psychologically, and autobiographically or biographically. So I was wondering, is there a contradiction there as you see it, or is that tension actually part of what the work is about?
Thank you.
That tension is at the heart of the work. This tension between, a feeling and understanding and intuition, and actually the empirical data that has been mystified in our minds. And so this tension between what it is that we feel about, a point in time or a moment, and actually the years, the history, the context, the political and economic calculi that have machined this feeling is interesting to me. So, I think there's this sort of, I'm looking for that tension in everything that I make, the tension between, this, as you described, inverting the commercial use of neon. And it's this tension between something that's really, there's almost, like some raver aesthetic. You mentioned the neon in the night. There's some kind of decadence, I think, to neon that you described quite well. that's in, it's a sharp contrast with this approach to the archive of, you know, taking, I started with a 7-volume anthology called The Documentary History of the Negro People of the United States by a historian called Herbert Aptheker. And so it's like something like 10,000 pages of archives. And so the sort of contrasting decadence of neon and this, you know, dry, relentless, painful process of looking for moments that are documented and recorded and, you know, sort of really, I guess, obscured in our minds at the same time. So these, you know, key moments for me pose this sort of problem. You know, we have this sort of mythical view of our past and our present and our future. And, you know, there's this way of taking that moment, and highlighting it that I think really gets at that tension. And so the sort of, I guess, my obsession with facts and with data, you know, it's that I think we have this sort of warped view in the United States of the situation of our liberal, democratic, sort of post-neoliberal capitalist situation, right? We have a view that, in short, is this, you know, equal opportunity, multiculturalism, and is the way that we live, right? Although that's been somewhat destabilized with the pandemic and you know, moments of kind of overt white supremacy becoming more visible with the president. But that even with all of that, there's still a mythical narrative. And even the language that we use, what we think of as right and truth and knowledge, it's all incredibly, I guess, spring-loaded by myth. And so what I'm interested in doing is not telling people what to think, but I'm interested in presenting facts in ways that invite thought, invite us to think things that may be unthinkable, invite us to think about terror and seduction, invite us to think about power, invite us to think about the mechanics of power, invite us to think about language and sort of ideology and hegemony or mass media representations, master narratives, as Toni Morrison would say. So I think your description of tension is really great. And with Liquor Store Theater, that tension, my same sort of obsession with data and fact, and overlaid with this, like, you know, sort of fantastical, bizarre, you know, philosophical, I don't know, approach is a common thread with the video and the simultaneous ethnographic research practice that goes on after the videos end, which is a great deal of what I discuss in the book.
Rahima, would you like to pick up?
Yes, I actually wanted to say something that Maya really kind of stated when she was talking about space. I know that for me, I I first encountered her work in Detroit at Reyes Fenn, seeing her show Machine, and was really taken by the idea that here there was a timeline. I was in a space, and then there was space being made for this timeline, and just this sort of personal associations or memory that happens. Like, you try to situate yourself when you see dates, right? You try to say, like, what does this date mean to me as an individual? And I found it really curious that how surprised I was by the information, by the data, right? And I also feel like when I look at Maya's work, she is unveiling, she's unveiling a new space that needed to have been made, right? Like unveiling a history that was deliberately hidden. And for me, when she talks about language, it matters. And when we look at dates and numbers, that's, quantifiable data, right? Like you don't necessarily dispute dates unless it's, you're having a conversation about, well, this happened on this day, right? Or you can. And so for me, when it became very important for my institution to collect the work, not only because this is something that was really sort of represented what was happening in Detroit as far as the Detroit art scene. We are really wanting to make sure that we represent our region at my museum and institution. But also just what the work was saying. We acquired from the 1526 series 1827, which talks about Black feminist thought, as far as in 1827, thinking about what Black feminism meant in that day, right? And it was something just so shocking to know that here there were women that had been previously enslaved that were saying, like, my place is not necessarily to darn socks, right? Or in 1928, looking at the idea of James Weldon Johnson saying, it's not that Black artists aren't making work. It's just that they're not being paid attention to. We've always been here. And so for me, I feel like Maya's work is making space. It's providing a seat at the table in some ways, in a very conceptual way, right? And then, it's funny because I'm in the middle of installing the work right now in our permanent collection galleries. And I've deliberately installed 1827 between two paintings one is from 1915 by Alfred Jurgens, and features, it's done very in this sort of very impressionistic manner, features, women walking on a sunny day, right? Against a woman of privilege, painted by William Merritt Chase from 1895. So it's important for me to say, okay, here's this space in between. I put that in between there to sort of say there's another voice of womanhood that hasn't been represented. And I thought it's really important to continue, even as I've been reading Liquor Store Theater. I'm really excited by the ideas that the work offers that talks about power dynamics and this intersection of how economy really drives a lot of oppression and violence, right? So I want to just thank Maya for having the courage to kind of do this practices, and it so differently, right? Because it's this intersection of something that's very seen as like not necessarily a subject that finds its way into the mainstream in a positive manner, right? Like when we talk about these communities, what comes out is just so, in the mainstream, is just so disheartening. And I think that she's trying to make a space that says that these people that live here, these are our people. These are not things like she used this word thingifying. Like we've been thingifying these urban communities. We need to stop it. People are people, and I really appreciate that about her work.
Thank you. I think I want to come back, if there is time, to some things between you and Matthew, because I think that quote Matthew picked up from the interview with the New York Times earlier this summer in July. This is quoting Maya, I don't have an interest in emotions or feelings. I like facts. These works reflect that. I predict that that is going to become a central passage with Maya's work, and all kinds of questions are going to come up there about the relationship between concept and strategy and historical content. Chris, can we bring you in to talk about your first experience with liquor store theater, indeed with Maya's practice? Because I imagine that the question of this sort of different jarring juxtaposition of different kinds of content and within the practice is something which must have struck you when you first encountered it.
Yeah, definitely. I first encountered Maya's work actually in her studio in the former bank that has it's almost a character in the book, how it's referred to and becomes grounding in that way, where she was living and had her studio. And I really have to shout out Biba Bell, who I know is in attendance
Absolutely.
this evening. Biba, when Mia Lux and I were doing our travel and research, we had a great visit with Biba in her beautiful apartment. And oftentimes we ask people, we're here, there's, what else should we see in terms of exhibitions or artists? And right away she said, go see Maya. And we reached out to her that same day and met that night just because we were scheduled with other things. And it was like the last visit, I don't know, it might've been 9 p.m. or something. And just had an amazing conversation. She screened numerous episodes of LST for us, really kind of talked about what is the practice, what is the work. And I think it's really that in-betweenness that Rahima was talking about in terms of it being such an interdisciplinary practice. When, I remember watching them right there with her, and I just kept asking myself, it's like, almost like, what is it? Like, where does the art reside? Because it's both documentation of a performance, right? What's the subject of it? It's Detroit, it's McDougal Hun in particular. It's also the individuals that are being interviewed, but it's also Maya herself as a performer, dancer, along with her other dancers and collaborators. She's as much a subject in the work as she is the author of it. And then you layer on the ethnographic portion of it and how it's really kind of portraying a city, and all of this stuff is so woven together. You can't really pull one thread out of it, and try to identify like, oh, this resides within dance, this resides within contemporary art. It's all so bundled together, and I think the LST book really helps to unpack a lot of that. It's so kind of concise and condensed within the videos, but it's really the book that opens up a lot of that, and the fact that she can move from references to dance and to anthropology and then straight to quotes from the numerous subjects that are in there. And that's what I find so compelling with it, is that it refuses to be pinned down into any one discipline, but it's so versed in all of these disciplines. And even Lux, I see doing that quite a bit in terms of what is it as an object, the way Matthew talked about, and also what is it as a research and archival practice as well.
So, Chris, that allows me to put a question I've been thinking about quite a lot in relation to Maya's practice then. Whether it's the object or whether it is the dance, the performance, what kind of action are we concerned with? What kind of, be it in an analytic way, Maya goes out of her way to say, I'm not interested in emotions. And the dance is not particularly expressive. It's not expressive dance, right? So what kind of action, whether we're looking at the dates in Lux from 1526 onwards, what kind of action If that question makes sense to you, are we concerned with? Because I think that the works are linked by common practice, but your question about where does the art reside makes me want to say, then what kind of action are we dealing with? And Maya, feel free to answer the question about your own practice. What kind of action is there? So I don't know, Chris, Rima, Rahima, Matthew, if you want, any of you want to pick up on that.
I'll jump in quickly as just to kind of act as another prompt for this. I would say in terms of LST, the dance is not for us. These are unscheduled, unannounced performances that were for the people that were in the neighborhood, that were passerbys or going to shop at the liquor stores or hanging out, so the dance in a sense is not ours. We're seeing the kind of resultant documentation of what Maya calls the dance as a kind of ethnographic prompt, right? To kind of elicit reactions, and then she can kind of come in and then interview and kind of continue the work. And I would say that the neons for Lux almost are a similar kind of prompt for the viewer.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, yeah, really, I think for me, the action is really at the level of this sort of asking monumental questions. There's a level, I guess, of sort of detail on the one hand, and like macro, broad scale context on the other hand, that I'm interested in, like walking a tightrope in between those sort of tensions. So, and I think the action for me too is turning things inside out and turning things upside down and inverting things. And so what do I mean by things? A something, a concept, a discipline. And I'm not doing this for the sake of, simply saying I'm doing something differently, right? Because that doesn't make any sense analytically.
Sure.
When we think about, 5,000 years that we've had writing around, right? So it's not about that. It's more to the point of really the idea of, I guess, the idea of something, the idea of a practice or of an action or of a thought dying so that a new thought, action, or practice or language can be reborn is interesting to me. And so I think about sort of the edges of like the most extreme edge of what I can do with an idea. So, the absolute most extreme edge of what I can do, I think from an anthropological perspective, in a way, liquor store theater is an effort to bring about the end of anthropology.
Huh.
It's an effort in a way that it's a statement in a way that anthropology needs to die. But, I read my PhD in anthropology, and I quite enjoy anthropology in all of its various epistemological or like historical knowledge forms, right? But I do think anthropology needs to die in order to be reborn. And so, with this project, I think Chris said something interesting about the sort of fact that I'm also a subject in the project, in the videos, in that I'm, sort of my presence is there in every single video. And so I'm really interested in this. I'm interested in anthropologists measuring themselves I'm interested in, a total rethinking at the level of concept, object, aesthetic, representation, because I think it's where these sort of striking, you know, I guess, moments are able to be found and then held up, and sort of they can produce unlimited thinking and conversation and engagements after that point, So I guess I could talk a little bit about how this sort of how this works in the 1526 and A Blank That Defies Gravity series. So this, of course, the 1526 series we've talked about is the series of neon dates and accompanying postcards that outline critical and monumental moments in United States history, and really with a focus on seduction, terror, and political economy. And so that's 1526, and the accompanying neon series is called A Blank That Defies Gravity. Neon sculpture series is, and that's the perfect image because this is the work I'm about to talk about. So this series is equally immersed in archive, in data, and in data to a degree that is absurd. But I'm also in this work interested in just light and form and color and space, and thinking about how a feeling of a moment may emanate. So this work that we're looking at is on view right now here at NADA with Reyes Finn in their virtual viewing room that you can check out. So this work is called A Blank That Defies Gravity, number 11 through 30. And what this work is, what you're looking at is $16 quadrillion. So $16 quadrillion is a seemingly absurd number of dollars. It's 16,000 trillions. 16,000 trillions. All right, that's enough. I won't numerically walk us back down to the million level, but we're going to kind of get there in a second. So this actual, the postcard accompanying this work describes what the $16 quadrillion is, which it's the calculation of the debt owed to descendants of African-American people who were enslaved over the period of 1790 through 1860, during which United States Census records were available. So it's only for covering this 1790 to 1860 period, so about 70 years. And so $16 quadrillion is calculated by a group of academics. The article just came out this year, and it's calculated using the lifetime value of freedom calculation that was used to compensate Japanese American internee descendants. So over the course of 1942 to 1945, Japanese American internee descendants received the compensation to cover those 3 years. And so that number was $20,000 per person with that 3-year time frame. So using the same formula over the 1790 to 1860, the figure comes to $16 quadrillion using 6% interest and hourly wage and work schedule data multiplied out over the years. And so what that amounts to and a letter of apology. So the Japanese American internees descendants also received, rightfully so, a letter of apology. So using the same formula and letter of apology, this would break down at the population level to $401 million per descendant of enslaved persons, plus a letter of apology. So with this work, A Blank That Defies Gravity, I'm asking you to imagine waking up and going to your mailbox and finding a letter of apology and finding a check for $401 million owed to you. The debt owed to you for untold genocide, human trafficking, rape, murder, family separation. Imagine that feeling of getting such an apology. So this piece, that's all of that data and context is the framework for this piece, and much more. It's there's all sorts of things that are going on. I think so there's like this vibration and this resonance for me that has to exist in a work, a project, a work, a practice, a praxis. So there's so many levels that there will never be a work I can talk about and explain to you fully. I've told you maybe 5% of the information about this piece. We've talked about maybe 2% of the information about liquor store theater. For me, a work has to be so necessary and so situated and just brimming with writing and information and context. And then you're just looking at what object or what, image or what choreography that you're viewing, and you see that, but there's just this complexity behind it that for me gives this attention that keeps me going.
At the same time, you're in dialogue with the language of Dan Flavin. And through Flavin's monuments, you know that Flavin did this extraordinary series of 39 monuments. I think it was 64 that he started, which in turn were inspired by Vladimir Tatlin's monument to the Third International, and many, many ways in which we could look at that. But so I'm just sort of interested in how then you've given us one kind of information, but there's another kind of information that you are also interested in, which is Dan Flavin. And then we can say Flavin is examining the monument to the International. And then we can begin to say, but is Flavin simply using it as a form? Are you using it as a form? Or is it also a way of looking at utopianism? That, as it were, between the Flavin and your interests, there is actually this utopian thing, which is how do we get this transfer of acknowledgement? How do we rewrite the possibilities of the future? Or can't we? Right? So that built into the way in which you are using the language of conceptual art is now this question of, well, is it a utopian project or not? Or is it a utopian desire or not? And I don't know if any of the panelists would like to, Rahima or Chris would like to, and Matthew to pick up on that.
Well, perhaps Maya, before you respond to Michael's question, there's another quote that you said that I'm very interested in, and I think it really resonates with what you just said and what you just showed us, and also what Michael's alluding to, which is, and I'll quote you again, it says, "I'm attracted to quite intellectual, conceptual, aesthetically cold, almost heartless looking work."
Yes, I have that quote as well.
and I understand that. It's interesting when Christopher referred, to the dance in the liquor store theater as it's not really expressive dance. It's not visceral in the sense that we might imagine what dance might mean or could mean. So perhaps to fold that back into Michael's observations about the recent work you just discussed, and this sort of relationship with reductive aesthetics, which I think you describe in a really interesting way as heartless-looking work, and clearly the content that motivates or drives this work is just very different.
Yeah, I think I guess there's this, and this is what really grabs me is this cold, authoritative, pared down, thrifty DIY, but still sleek, still smooth, aesthetic that's, minimalist, or post-minimalist to a fault. And I think even in the choreography that you see in the Liquor Store Theater series, it's this sort of quotidian or pedestrian everyday movement is at the core of the sort of movement references that I draw from. And then in addition to that, there's this sort of jujitsu and finger tutting, and it's all quite machine inflected. It's all quite cyborged or like roboticized, but in a way that's smooth. So I think really there's some tension there that I find attractive with this, post-minimalist, cold, brutal, analytical, kind of aesthetic that contrasts with the complexity and really the density of the concepts. So I'm attracted to that quite a lot. Everything I just, there's something so satisfying to me in simplicity and and minimalism. And this, I think, really, I think it's often terror that is able to be reduced and made simple and made glamorous. And, terror and genocide are able to be reduced and made very glamorous and simple and smooth. So in the other piece that's on view with Reyes Finn's virtual viewing room for NADA is called 2020. So it's one of the 1526s. And the postcard accompanying 2020, I can tell you off the top of my head, because it's one sentence and it explains what I'm trying to get at here in a rather bumbling way, which is there will be a smooth transition into a second Trump administration. Mike Pompeo said that, I think it was 12 November of this year. And so that's the postcard for the 2020 piece. So to me, like the smoothness and the austereness and the way that the terror, the hundreds of thousands of people that have died, under this administration's watch this year, many of them unnecessarily with better, pandemic controls in place. And the fact that this sentence can roll off of the tongue, there will be a second transition. There will be a smooth transition into a second Trump administration. So I'm interested in those aesthetics for my work, which inverts the erasure. It inverts simplification of people and histories, I'm demanding, context. I'm demanding facts. I'm saying, you can't mystify this. Look at the data. Um, you know,
Maya, can I ask you about the gender politics of LST? I mean, one of the things that really struck me was how you talked about the women that wouldn't talk on camera, but how you noticed how women were moving to and from in their neighborhoods. And being someone that is, I'm from the South Side of Chicago, and I'm very familiar with different neighborhoods that are on the South Side of Chicago, and found my own body moving differently depending upon where it was. So I was really curious about that observation, and also just why women weren't on camera, why they didn't want to talk more on camera to you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So that it's an important question, and I discuss this extensively in the book, along with all of the relationships that continued after the cameras turned off, which is so important to bring up. I talk to neighbors still weekly, and so your question prompts me to think about all of the layers of the people that we haven't even talked about, that are talked about in the book. But so gender, I think, it's so important in the gender politics in the neighborhood in Detroit, in sort of, the urban Black ethnographic context, so important. However, there's a couple of forces are in play where the way that post-industrial sort of Rust Belt, economically distressed neighborhood like McDougal Hunt is structured, is that it's so subjected and abject to this poverty of economic poverty. It's a culturally rich neighborhood, that the gender politics are often sort of, I guess, discussed last in a way, if they're discussed at all, because the overarching political economic exploitation is so dire. The simultaneous forces of deindustrialization and, criminalization of nonviolent drug offenses, and this overarching surveillance, policing, and exploitative capitalist regimes are so, I guess, feminizing. Poverty globally is a feminizing project, that actually the discussion of different ways that sort of the particular subjection that women still experience in light of these broad overarching features become obscured. But I think liquor store theater has been fascinating project, because it brought forward to me both the specific and the specific real violence that women are subjected to in sort of capitalist exploitive regimes and situations. And it's made visible in a big way by how women are very much on the scene behind the cameras. They talk to me equally as men do behind the camera, and my relationships with neighbors likewise. But women aren't able to consent to appear in the on-camera interviews to the degree that men are. And this was over the course of the 6 years of the project, about 25 to 30% of my interview participants were women. So the vast majority were men. But at every store, at every single shoot, I always talked to women, and sometimes had the longest and most detailed discussions with women. So I think the politics on the scene of, you know, sort of just the ways in which people are gendered, and sort of even in an act of going to the store, the particular aversion to entering a store for fear of being read a certain way, you know, or for fear of having to deal with, you know, untoward commentary from the store manager, or from, you know, a passerby or whomever. So I would notice, you know, sort of the choreography of women around the stores is very different. I first noticed this within myself, and I talk about this in the book in detail. Liquor store theater, the frame of the liquor store, realizing that the liquor store is some kind of a ready-made. This all started to come together for me as I lived in the bank right across my studio. Bank shared with Todd Stovall, who composed all of the liquor store theater music. So looking at this from the bank, from Todd Stovall in my studio, you can look right across the street and see what locals refer to as the blue store. Ironically, as the facade is all blue, I've taken some of those signs down and made them into plexi works. But at any rate, I had this aversion to that store. In the first year that I lived in the bank, I refused to go to that store. And I started to ask myself why, and talk to people, and ultimately became obsessed with the liquor stores, and, you know, started performing at them day in and day out over the course of 6 years, and made this project. But it really started from my own feeling of vulnerability in these spaces as a woman, and my own concerns about how I would be read or received in these spaces as a woman. And then I in the book, I discuss the problems with me, with my particular presence, my particular body, the problems that I'm causing actually, that I'm not destabilizing, you know, sort of a cis heteronormative, you know, gendered embodiment of a woman identified person. So I discuss that extensively in the book as well. You know, and one of the women who I spoke with, she was a bus driver, and in the book, I discuss her conversation in great detail. And she said, you know, yeah, Detroit's coming back, but it's not for me. It's not safe. It's not safe for me. But yeah, it's coming back, and real estate speculators are descending, and, you know, international, you know, news journalists are descending, but Detroit, it's still not safe for me. So I think in these conversations, it's incredibly important that to resist the temptation to simplify, and the gender politics at the stores really demand more complicating and more discussion. And the fact that, you know, the patriarchal heteronormative structure impacts, you know, women that are in neighborhoods like McDougall Hunt to an even greater degree, but yet this is erased to a greater degree because there's an overall emergency that's so dire. But we have to fiercely refuse to erase the fact that remains.
It strikes me, and our time is now, we're just a few minutes over 7:30. But it strikes me that first there was no question of being able to cover all of the important questions and issues raised by not just the book, but your project and your practice. But it strikes me that very much what is going on here is that your practice is part of a larger recognition of a politics of emergency. That, as it were, states of emergencies are no longer things that are declared by a government for a particular time. That, as it were, it's expanding. And so the state of emergency is now linked to a politics of visibility, which I think is one of the things that I've taken away from your project. If we could be very brief, could I ask each of the panelists just to conclude, if we could say something about what you find, kind of important in this project overall, as a way of concluding and saying, hey, look, this is why we are here. This is why we are following this person's work. I don't know if anyone would be interested in saying, Matthew, Chris, Rahima.
I'll just speak to, Maya's current exhibition in New York, which runs through next Saturday, December 12th. And pre-pandemic, we'd scheduled Maya's show would have happened much earlier in the spring. And, strangely, I think that the show ended up opening in September, running through now. The delay in its presentation has, effectively charged the work in a way that we could never have anticipated. So a visitor to the gallery in the last month would have stood in that space with those dates, with that information, but in the context of the lead up to the recent election and everything that entails. So again, what I think's, truly remarkable about the work is that it isn't fixed. Right. It isn't fixed in its time of creation. Mm-hmm. It isn't fixed in its time of display, that it continues to resonate, and it's picking up from what's going on around it too. And, I think that's really to the strength of perhaps what Maya alluded to about this interest in simplicity and reductive languages that can speak loudly and broadly. So if anyone's in New York before next Saturday, please stop by and visit Christopher's Institution, which is next door.
Chris, briefly.
More importantly, go to White Columns and see Maya's show. Very briefly, I think one of the powerful things, if you look at Maya's overall practice, is how it's tackling this historic and systemic racism that's so embedded in the nation, that's like actively rendered invisible. And she finds a way to really make that present, felt, and literally sheds light. I think imagining Rahima's installation and how you have this neon amongst these two paintings, and it's literally giving light, illuminating aspects of our lives, work, the history of this country in ways that is so hard to see.
Thank you very much, Chris. Rahima, could you take us out?
Oh, goodness. I have so many thoughts, but what I'll say is that, and what I think about all the time now is how much language matters, and thinking about how this is also about Maya's practice is also about access, right? Like, if you have access to resources, then you can do many things. If you don't have access to resources, what is it that you can do? And I think that when you see spaces that generate so much income in a neighborhood or in communities where the poverty level is just, that's a devastating thought, right? That on the backs of people that are struggling, that you have this money-making machine that is just sucking. And the thing about it is I feel like there is an affirmation of people that have been overlooked that is really important, that's happening in the work. As Chris said, yes, making the systemic racism that's in the fabric visible is really important. And using light, that's kind of brilliant, actually. It's really spot on.
I absolutely agree about the light is brilliant. Guys want? Rahima, Chris, Matthew, thank you so much. But above all, thank you, Maya Stovall. We've introduced Maya as an artist, and obviously she's also a writer. I should also say she is a scholar, and she is currently assistant professor at California Polytechnic State University. So her book is both, it's a wonderful, wonderful. I should also say that I owe my introduction to Maya, to Biba Bell as well. And Biba and Maya have been for me in my time in Detroit, absolutely incredible examples of the kind of contemporary practice that combines research with thought, installation, performance. It's been incredible. So that you are scholar, artist, PhD, gallerist, all of that to my mind is what makes your work incredibly contemporary. And so thank you very much, Maya, and congratulations again. It's a great accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to the audience for joining us and listening until this time next year.
I think we're going to screen a video.
Okay. Oh, yes.
We're not totally,
Yes.
yeah, I don't.
Okay. Okay. Let's go back to the people controlling this.
What's going on in Detroit right now?
A lot of stuff going on in Detroit. You can see we done beautified our home. We bringing it back. We trying to bring Detroit back.
Detroit has came out now. It's good. The coming is good. Everything is good.
We got downtown. So much fun for the kids. The Christmas stuff. You should bring them out to the Christmas show for the kids. And as you look, you can see as you're going up, you got a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people that's opening up a lot of black businesses and stuff like that, that's trying to get it going and open Detroit back up.
What's going on with the east side of Detroit?
They're building the east side, a lot of things, and downtown Detroit.
And I think it's a beautiful thing because money coming to the city. Didn't nobody like to invest in the city because they were so scared of all the drama and the negativity. But come on to the city. We doing big now. We got it going. Detroit back. Y'all have a nice day.
Thank you.
Okay.
in the United States? What's going on there?
People, they like, you know, they work, everybody they work.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like before.
Yeah.
Before they don't have job. People that was looking for a job now. People, a lot of companies, they looking for people to hire.
With Donald Trump, he's a good president.
Yeah, he's a good president. Yeah.
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 You like Trump?
I like him.
What do you like about Trump?
Because I like him. He the superior of the United States. Yeah, he got the money, all the money from all over, you know. He's like a businessman, you know. Like, you know, everybody they have all nice day, they're busy. The economy is good, everything. Soon the President Trump came. Immigration, it's like, I don't know, it's like, you know, whoever, you know, have papers, like, you know, you have to go. I'll do something, you know. You like him?
Do I like Trump? I think that he is making many decisions that have vast implications around the world and that impact a relatively small number of people in a positive way. I think the majority of the policy that he's implementing hurts the majority of people.
Good man here, good man.
Tell me, you like him or no?
It's not about like or dislike. I'm more interested in the facts. I'm interested in the facts of what he's doing and how this, you know, the historical, materialist, political, economic, socio-cultural implications of what he's doing is what I'm interested in. You're trying to pin me down. Well, I'm interested in the empirical data. You know, when I see things like there was a 7-year-old girl who died who was trying to get into the country, you know, the migrants who were trying to come in, and she died because they wouldn't give her medical care. Things like that are problematic, like when we don't value all people, you know, because people are poor, we don't care. I think that that's a problem. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I got it.
And so you're interviewing me now, huh? Is that
Yeah.
That's what we're doing,
Yeah.
huh? Yeah. That happens sometimes.
All right, man.
So thank you.
No problem.